What if it drifts off like a party at the end of the night, with only a few drunks left mumbling in the corners? What if the humans who remain are too busy surviving to tend to the books and the servers? What if literacy has a horizon and it's near? Isn't it all just noise then? So that should give you some idea of what's at stake in this book, and what is, I think, at stake for all of us on this planet right now. And it may sound grim, what I've described, but strangely enough, at that time, it didn't feel grim. And I don't believe that this book is a particularly grim book either, despite its quite dark subject matter in times. I'm going to read a little more from the very next page. Really, I mean it when I say we were smiling. We were talking about the end of time and the increasingly probable destruction of everything we knew and loved. We didn't relish any of it, but in the context of the walk we had just taken, time took a different shape. The desert enforces its own perspective. It shrinks you and puts eternity in the foreground. If you're open to it and don't mind a diminished role in this drama, it insists quietly on the surging beauty of all things and non-things, living and dead, and not formally alive. And then something even stranger happened. I drove home feeling this almost ecstatic sense of gratitude, although I didn't know at the time what I felt so thankful for. I went to bed, I woke up, I worked on whatever I was working on at the time, and a week or so later I remembered that walk and I sat down to write about it, more or less just as a journal entry, to make sure I didn't forget it. And I basically kept writing for the next 12 months. That's an exaggeration, but only barely. I'd been working on a novel, which I intended to get back to that day. I still haven't returned to it. Instead, I wrote what became Desert Notebooks. And the process of writing it was also a process of reading and of writing as I read. I've always thought that reading is at least half of writing, and we can talk about that more later if you'd like. But those owls that I saw, that we saw, sent me to the Quiche Maya text, the Popol Vuh, in which owls play a role, then to Borges, then to Hegel, and to Walter Benjamin and Ovid, and the Greek myths, and the stories told by the people of the Mojave, the Chemehuevi, the Serrano, the Mojave, the Odom. And later to the extraordinary work of a scholar named Martin Bernal, Black Athena, which is about the way European scholars in the 18th and 19th centuries scrubbed their understanding of ancient Greek civilization, of its links to and roots in Africa and Asia, and constructed thereby an ethnically cleansed mythology of Western origins. And when people talk these days about Western civilization and about white Americans as inheritors of the glories of Western civilization, and you hear some of this in the president's speeches, it is precisely that ethnically cleansed and entirely fictional mythology that they're referring to. My investigations about time, I began to understand, were about not just this experiential sense that time was breaking down, but about understanding the roots of that mythology. My investigations were about, I came to understand, a politics of time, about how time functioned as an ideological instrument, because I realized time had history too. It existed within time, and the factors that shape our perception of time right now, the rise of capitalism and of theories and structures of racial hierarchy and white supremacy, are the very same factors that are driving the multiple crises that are spiraling around us right now, distorting our sense of time, pushing everything towards collapse, towards something that looked a lot like the end of time. But of course, time doesn't end. And if what I've just said sounds too abstract, I'll read a little bit more from a later section of the book that should make it a bit more concrete. And this is a section about how time perception changed in Europe. Time lays past according to the rhythms of the plow and the scythe, the wheels of the saint's day, and the opportunities for rest and carousal that accompanied them. For all but a minuscule literate elite, the years passed without number. Churches did not trouble to record the years of births, baptisms, and marriages, until the 16th century. Common people's lives were ruled by neither days nor hours. The church bells would ring for matins and vespers, but no further demarcation of time was necessary or even possible. Mechanical clocks only began to appear on church towers in the 14th century, and then only in cities and large towns. For the next 400 years, it would have made little sense to slice an hour into smaller bits. Most clocks did not even have minute hands. If the need arose, time could be subdivided into commonly understood and distinctly human-sized quantities. The time it takes to mow a field of grain, say, or to recite an Our Father, or to urinate. An interval known as a pissing while, made into Shakespeare's Two Gentlemen of Verona, as in, he had not been there, bless the mark, a pissing while, but all the chambers smelt him. Over the course of the 17th century, more accurate clocks began to proliferate, and eventually to migrate from town squares and cathedral belfries into the drawing rooms of the gentry. In another 50 years, technology, specifically the development of the balance spring and the regulator, allowed clocks to miniaturize without any sacrifice in accuracy, and to take refuge in the pockets of an emerging class of merchants and manufacturers. In 1687, 10 years after the invention of the balance spring, Isaac Newton elevated time in an extraordinary fashion, defining it as an absolute and independent force that progressed at a consistent rate regardless of who was perceiving it, or if it were perceived at all. Even if the universe were entirely empty, time would tick on, echoing through the void like God's very pulse. And why not? Any mortals with sufficient income to spare could by then carry time around with them, trapping it in a compact silver case, embossed perhaps with golden stars. Whether its owner was awake or asleep, alive or dead, it would tick and talk for eternity, unless they neglected to wind it. By 1760, the personal timepiece had become sufficiently widespread that a British satirist could complain that, "Sir, will you have your clock wound up?" had become the common expression of streetwalkers. Over the course of the next century and a half, time, once the property of none and all, would belong to the rich and the powerful. First to the factory owners, then the railway magnates, then to the politicians and military men, divvied up according to the needs of capital and conquest. Technology, the British historian E.P. Thompson observed, was never the decisive factor. Though the key horological innovations had occurred decades earlier, the general diffusion of clocks and watches in England did not take place until the 1790s, at the exact moment when the Industrial Revolution demanded an exact synchronization of labor. Large-scale industrialization, Thompson argued, had reconfigured labor. Workers who had once bartered their skills or their strength now hired out their time. They were paid by the day or the hour rather than the task or the piece. In a very literal sense, time became money. It became something wholly abstract, something independent of our bodies, of the circulation of our blood, and the transit of our thoughts and desires. It could be used or misused, spent or wasted, even stolen. Moments of inactivity were suddenly transformed into something that would have been nonsensical a few years earlier, a theft of time that vigilant managers strive to guard against. The ironworks in Smallwell in northeast England, which was for a little while the largest factory in Europe, was the first to employ a monitor tasked with noting every worker's arrivals and departures to the minute, and with guarding the clock to prevent workers from setting it forward or back. Power over time had become power over labor, which is to say, over people. It was at this very same moment, which was also the moment of revolutionary upheaval in France and in Haiti, of Condorcet's frenzied ode to human progress, and by many measures, the beginning of the modern era, that with the development of the coal-powered steam engine, the industrializing societies of Europe and North America began releasing sufficient carbon dioxide to eventually alter the climate of the Earth. It was then, too, that the stars began to disappear from the skies of the cities and towns of Europe and North America, and from the consciousness of their inhabitants, smeared away by the smoke of all those factories and by the glow of the gas lamps that in the early decades of the 1800s were beginning to illuminate the streets of European capitals. It was then that time got inside us. But this is also a book about the desert, and the desert told me something very different about time. I'd moved from Los Angeles to Joshua Tree in 2016, just after the presidential election. And that was a coincidence, but it turned out to be a very good moment for a major shift in consciousness, which is one thing the desert can give you. Very quickly, living out there, your sense of time shifts. Not much happens in the course of a day, but at the same time, a lot does. The wind blows, and you know it's the wind and the rain and the slow trickle and sometimes the sudden rush of water through the rocks that over millennia have shaped the landscape around you. You see and feel the rhythms of the seasons, the heat and the cold and the rain, and you see and feel and hear and smell how other living things respond to these changes, blossoming and opening themselves when there is water enough, shutting themselves down and hiding themselves away when there's not. And you begin to understand that talking about time is just another way of talking about life, which has rhythms of its own, if you care to listen. The stars come out at night, and over the course of a few weeks or months or years, you can watch the sky change and gain a sense of time that is wider still.
I don't know, I can't figure it out.
I'm going to read a little more. This is from closer to the beginning. Not everyone likes the desert. I've loved it since the first time I came out here alone. Not to Joshua Tree that time, but farther north and east to Death Valley. That was 18 years ago. I'd messed up my life in a number of ways that at the time felt irreparable. Being young and overly literal, I decided to head for the lowest spot in the hemisphere. I drove out from LA, wrapped a scarf around my head, and walked out beneath the brutal sun over the salt flats in Badwater Basin. The earth was cracked and crusted white, the heat quivering above it. I doubt I brought much water. I didn't make it to the very lowest point. It was hot, and walking out there, the salt crackling beneath my boots, I started laughing and couldn't stop. Mainly at myself, but at everything else too. The misery, the sense of failure that had sat on my shoulders for months just lifted off, pulverized by pure absurdity. I remember finding insects that had died there and been encrusted with white crystals of salt. Little jeweled crickets. I put a couple in my pocket and didn't feel bad about turning around. I stayed in Death Valley for a day or two longer and can't remember ever feeling so free. Later, my ex and I would rent a cabin in Joshua Tree for a month or two each year and come out to write. She'd lived there before, and she teased me at first. City boy, you'll be running back before a week is up. It turned out that the solitude and the silence suited me, and the clarity of the light. Sometimes I came alone for weeks at a time. I didn't even want to drive into town to buy groceries. When work forced me back home to Los Angeles, and really I loved LA, I raced back to the desert as soon as I was done. The moment I got off the interstate and headed up the grade and over the mountains, I would roll down the windows, sniff the air like a dog, and feel the tension sliding from my spine. I grew up in the New York suburbs, and my people are originally from cloudy, low-skied lands, Scotland, Ireland, Poland, Ukraine, but I had never been anywhere where I felt so immediately at home. Some people have the opposite response. My godmother and her partner came down to visit once from San Francisco. Her partner, who was probably 60 at the time, was overcome with joy the first time we took him into the park being the national park in Joshua Tree. He turned into a little boy, scrambling over boulders, his eyes enormous, his face transformed. But my godmother felt uneasy and exposed. Everything was sharp. There was too much death around. She missed the nurturing embrace of leafy green plants, moisture, and abundance. Other friends have had the same reaction. It's not an aesthetic aversion so much as an existential allergy. They feel dread, something approaching panic. They see only emptiness and the bare cruelty of nature, though the forest and the coast are no less cruel. I tried to explain that what I saw around me was not just death, but right next to it, sharing the same space, the urgency, brilliance, and stubbornness of life. You couldn't always see it, and never would if you didn't look, but everything was alive. Even the rocks and the dirt are alive. I don't mean that in some mystical sense, or not only in that sense. A cryptobiotic crust of microorganisms, bacteria, lichens, mosses, algae, fungi, covers the desert floor. An invisible web of fibrous tentacles that allows the soil to absorb the rain and resist the wind, sheltering the roots of plants and the animals that tunnel and burrow down there, protecting everything that skitters beneath the surface of the scene. Lichens splash the rocks with brilliant greens, yellows, reds. Life thrums through this place like a current, coursing through matter that is anything but inert. A barrel cactus, a brilliant neon pink, growing alone in a crevice, anchoring itself in a few inches of sand between the rocks. Rodents that will never in their lives drink a sip of liquid water, surviving solely on the sparse moisture in the seeds they so nervously eat. The spring of a jackrabbit, startled in a wash, the speech of ravens, and at night of coyotes and of owls. In the spring, after a New York weekend's worth of rain stretched out over the entire winter, it all burst forth in wild celebration. Shrubs that seemed leafless, dry, dead for months, revealed themselves in sudden and outrageous color, like drag queens at a ball. Some of them bide their time, waiting for the late summer downpours, and only then, in August or September, showing themselves in brilliant yellows, purples, blues. Yes, death was everywhere too, and more obvious here than in the fir and redwood forests of the north, or the oak and chaparral that roll over the hills along the coast. There are rattlesnakes and mountain lions, and the heat is surely lethal. There are creatures out of nightmares. There's a giant wasp bigger than a hummingbird that lays its eggs in the flesh of living tarantulas, so that its offspring will have something to eat the moment that they hatch. There's a lizard that shoots blood from its eyes to scare off predators. A shrike that impales lizards on yucca spikes so that it can eat them at its leisure. Sometimes you see them suspended like a warning, the corpses of heretics left hanging from the ramparts. You can't avoid the cruelty, though that's the wrong word because it's nothing so intentional. Your consciousness is not central to this drama. No one's is. That may be the real source of horror here and of liberation. Whatever you imagine is unique about yourself, whatever you think matters, the coyotes don't care, and the owls don't care, and the stars most certainly don't. The desert would be fine without you. It will be. Even if in our heedlessness we wipe out half the species in it. The desert practically shouts that at you all day and all night, that it and life in all its resiliency and multiplicity and magic pulsing force will go on, whatever we do or don't do, whether we're still here or not. And I guess I'll wrap up by suggesting, I know I opened with some pretty grim facts about what's happening now, but by suggesting, we can talk about this more if you like, that what I experienced in the desert, I also found everywhere I looked in human history, that magic pulsing force, life surging forth even in the darkest spots, the ones in which we assume that only death exists and barrenness. I'm sure some of us have felt pretty close to those spots these last few months. And it can be tempting from our vantage point, from the precipice on which we currently sit, contemplating the daily death counts, the latest extinction news, the rising temperatures in the Arctic, and the rising strength of the fascists, and I do not use that word lightly, that now control the governments of 4 of the 10 largest nations on the planet. It can be tempting to look behind us and around us and see only the disasters, the genocides, all the catastrophes on which this current catastrophe sits. The German scholar and critic Walter Benjamin famously described the angel of history as being propelled backwards, blindly into the future, still facing the past. Where we perceive a chain of events, Benjamin wrote, the angel sees one single catastrophe, which keeps piling wreckage and hurls it in front of his feet. Now, history is that, without doubt. But I think Benjamin also knew that it is not just that. In the same essay, Benjamin wrote about what he called the time of now, by which he meant to point, I think, towards a more voluminous understanding of the present that includes all of the past and all possible futures within it, that is pregnant with them in every fraction of every moment, a notion of time that is writhing and ready to burst with all that it carries. To help blast it open was, in Benjamin's understanding, a revolutionary act and our only hope of salvation. This was not for Benjamin, and it's not for me, a merely philosophical task or a religious task, one that could be completed alone through contemplation or meditation or self-care. It is and must be a political act, a collective act, one that we perform together. I've been thinking a lot these last few years about all the ways that the past seems to be breaking through into the present. The permafrost melting, revealing the bones of creatures long extinct, drought revealing ancient ruins in Iraq, in Spain, in the UK, in the Amazon, Nazis, and all the other buried ghosts of histories on the march again. The past, bubbling and storming its way up into the present, makes demands with the same breath that the future does. It always has, but many of us ignored it for too long. We can't anymore. I don't believe this is something to be frightened of. I believe that we have arrived at a reckoning. It is time. I hope this book helps to clarify what is at stake for all of us and to remind us of the strength and love that we will need to proceed. Thank you. I hope you have some questions, and I'm happy to talk more about any of that or any of the stuff that I didn't manage to talk about that's also in this book.
All right, this is Butch. I'm live, Ben. You can hear me, correct?
I can hear you, yeah.
Yeah, I think everybody can. What's your take on, population as an aspect of this? And I know here in Colorado and in Chaffee County, it's changed so much. There are so many people, that are here. I think with COVID this year, Chaffee County being a recreational area, it's just been overrun with people. And so, what's your take on the future of population and how that impacts everything that you're talking about?
Yeah, I think in one sense, I think you're clearly correct. And in another sense, it's something that I'm always a little nervous to talk about. Because, if you look at the population growth over the last 2 centuries, the Earth is now sustaining human populations that it's never had to sustain before. And the growth has just been absolutely extraordinary. And I think it's pretty clear to us that the way we're living now, at least, the Earth cannot hold this many people living the way we live, right? What makes me nervous, though, is that when we talk about population, the problem is always someone else. Because we're all part of the population, right? We're all among those numbers. And when we say there are too many people, we tend to look at other parts of the world or other parts of the country and to say it's those people over there. There's too many of them. It's not us. And that, I think, is a real problem. And I think any path forward that is going to be sustainable for whatever number of people is going to have to not begin with those kinds of distinctions. And I think the larger battle is trying to get past the things that separate us from those people over there who we can think of as just being too many, who are just sort of abstract faces, and who we wish there were less of.
All right, thank you. And everybody else, if you have any questions, go to your chat and put them in. And
Bruce, Butch, I'm having trouble typing anything into the chat. I'm not sure if other people are too. It seems to not work.
Okay, well, let's see.
You're typing at the bottom, right? That says
Yeah.
type your message here.
Yes, ma'am. Maybe it's just like my laptop. I don't know, but it's not letting me type anything. I guess apparently there are no questions. We are not allowing any questions about the end of time.
Oh no, Wendy Hall says it's working for her.
Okay, that's good.
I just put this. Can you see
Good
this?
to know.
Right.
So Ben, I'm going to follow up on the population thing. I saw something, and I can't remember who it was, but a guy had come out with a study saying that his forecast for the future population, and I know, by the end of the century, there's some people that are talk very high numbers. And he said actually he thinks it will be less than where we are now because this is my aside now. I'm throwing into this part of it. Elon Musk is going to have his Starpoint, internet up for every person on the planet. And he didn't mention that, but anyway, what he did say was that education of women is the key to lower fertility rates, and we have seen that across history, and that as people around the world and women around the world become more educated and knowledgeable, that the fertility rates will go down. So at least for that aspect of it, he was saying that he doesn't think it's going to be as bad as what some people are saying. It's just an opinion, obviously.
When you mentioned Elon Musk, I was hoping you were going to say the population is going to drop because the billionaires are all going to fly off into space. And of course, there's not that many of them. It would be a drop in the bucket, but it would be a good start. I might take back what I say about getting rid of them.
Right. Okay.
How do you send your question?
So if you look at the ribbon at the bottom of your Zoom, there's a chat. It looks like a little cartoon bubble that you can press on, and then at the bottom it says type your message here.
I've typed it. I see it. How do I send it? Is it sent automatically?
It
Just
should
hit
be
enter.
sent. Yeah.
Type it and hit enter, Ken.
Enter. Oh,
Okay, we have a question from Rebecca. How do you see change of consciousness as the path forward in hope? You mentioned your own change of mind and enlightenment. Please say more about what that was for you.
Oh God, I certainly wouldn't characterize anything I've experienced as my enlightenment. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I am very far from enlightened. But I think one of the things that I certainly became really conscious of in this book, in writing this book, in the course of it, and in the course of living in the desert, was something that I touched on in the parts that I've read today, which is the centrality, that's the wrong way to put it, of decentering our own human experiences, our own individual experiences, and the importance of humankind, right? I think we have a tendency to see the rest of the world as pretty close to dead, right? As something that is filled with tasty things for us, pleasant experiences that we can go and have, but the world is not something with its own, which is made of infinite other consciousnesses, and I think seeing that we are the farthest thing from alone, that everything is screaming with life, with desire, with intention, has to be the beginning of any sustainable way to live on this planet. That we can't just treat the planet as a set of resources that are there for our exploitation, and we can't treat other people in that way either. The one thing I would say, though, that I tried to touch on at the end of this is that I'm not sure that change of consciousness is enough. And it's not just that intentions are never enough, but I think the kind of change of consciousness I'm talking about is something that occurs not just by yourself living alone in the desert, but together with other people and other beings, fighting for a common cause, understanding yourselves as part of something much, much larger. And I think that, the climate crisis is certainly showing us that. We thought we were alone here. We thought we could do whatever we want. And in fact, our actions have very severe consequences. And in order to reverse that, we are going to have to act together, and we're going to have to forge alliances and forms of solidarity that at the moment are still foreign to us.
So Rebecca says that she loves the emphasis on decentering us and our exploitation. That's enlightened. My favorite new line, the coyotes don't care.
They don't care.
So we have a question from Christine as well, but Ken, I don't see your question. Please go ahead and unmute yourself and ask it.
Enter. And I see it on the little thing. Should I hit X at the top of the window where the question is?
Well, just read us your question. We're hearing you, Ben, or Ken.
Do you believe in life after death, an afterlife, that is? Why or why not?
Ooh, that's a hard question. I'm not ready for that one. Yeah, I suppose I do. I don't believe in the continuing life of the individual soul as it's usually conceived by by the monotheistic religions. I believe that I don't believe that death is final. I think everything in the universe combines and recombines, and we're part of that. I think one way to think about that is the way a lot of cultures have thought about reincarnation. I don't know if I would articulate it in that way, but I think metaphorically, at least, that makes a lot of sense to me. That whatever we are doesn't go away; it recombines in other ways with other things. I feel like a babbling stoner, but it's a tough question to answer without doing that.
I have a follow-up. I don't know if I'm supposed to hold it to myself, so I do have a follow-up question, but I'll unmute now and leave it to the leader to.
Well, you can go ahead with your follow-up question.
Well, if there's no afterlife, sounds like you're dispersing the molecules all over and saying that it's you. What is a being? What defines a being? You used the word earlier.
I'm not entirely sure I understand the first part of what you're saying. But, what is a being? You or me or any of us, or a dog or a cat or a coyote or sorry, I think my computer wants me to stop doing social networking in 5 minutes. I hope it won't cut us off, because I think this somehow counts.
Is the computer a being?
The computer is an evil being. It is the bane of my existence as a being, and I hope it does not reincarnate in any form.
Well, Christine's question is, I often think that Earth will endure no matter what. Earth will think of humans as a dog thinks of shaking off hundreds or thousands of fleas. But how can we extend this idea to the universe? Are humans the equivalent of pests?
It can certainly be tempting to think so, but I don't think that we are. And one of the things that I was trying to figure out in this book, and that the book develops some theories about, is is what happened. Why did humans become these extraordinarily destructive beings that we are? And the fact is that for most of human history, for tens of thousands of years, we did not have anything like the impacts on the planet or on other species that we've had in the last 200 years. And something happened. And that something was clearly industrialization, right? And that something is also tied to our economic system, capitalism. And I think it is also tied to the political and philosophical structures that arose with industrialization and capitalism, and with colonialism, so I think there is this thing where humans view the entire earth in entirely instrumental terms, not as something alive, not as something sacred, but as something that can be churned away and turned into money. This is new. This is brand new. In the history of humankind, this is the wing, a single wing beat of a hummingbird, and that gives me some real hope, right? That there are other ways for human beings to arrange themselves, to relate to one another, to relate to the planet, to relate to the other forms of life on the planet. And to reach them, I think we have both a lot of creativity to draw upon, but also a lot of remembering. Of cultures we have erased, destroyed, disregarded. So yeah, I don't think we're a pest. I think we have an illness, and I hope we can work together and find a cure. I keep thinking about that question about what are beings, and it's a great question. I really answered it poorly. There's a line that I quote in the book, which I'm quoting the French mid-19th century revolutionary figure Louis Auguste Blanqui, who believed he was quoting Pascal, but I think Pascal was actually quoting Giordano Bruno. And it's something like, the universe is a sphere whose surface is nowhere and whose center is everywhere. Which takes some thinking, this definition, right? But this radical decentering of consciousness, we are a center, but the center is both everywhere and nowhere. And I think this, if you accept a notion like that, then the integrity of individual beings as egos, as selves, starts to fall apart a bit and to fray a bit. And it becomes harder to say, that I am this separate entity from you, or from a coyote, or from a Joshua tree, or a creosote. So I hope that this bit of babbling complements my past bit of babbling to answer your question a little better.
I don't see any more questions that have come in.
Let me just ask you this, Kelly. Did our previous lecturer, Craig Childs, also talk about a huge number of owls that he saw in the desert? It seems to me that there's a little bit of young synchronicity here. But I don't know. I was going to ask about that, but I'm not sure if it was owls. It might have been vultures or something else.
He had a picture of a huge, essentially swarm of birds, but I don't think he said they were owls.
Okay. I was
Oh, but
thinking
Rebecca said that Craig did.
he did. Okay. So I was going to ask about synchronicity, and is this somehow an amazing moment for Collegiate Peaks Forum series?
I think
An amazing Jungian moment.
I was looking, Owls may be having a moment. One of the books that was included in the long list for the National Book Award, which was released today, is a book about owls. And I know nothing more about it than that, except that it's a book about owls. So, owls are having a hard time of it, like the rest of us. But
Well, Denny Arter says they were ravens. At least I
Oh,
think
raven.
the
Oh, maybe
photo.
ravens.
Yeah.
I do know that in Maya cosmology, owls can be good or bad, and you can tell the bad owls by the way they smell. So there you go.
Well, in the Popol Vuh, they were the messengers from the lords of the dead.
Yes, absolutely.
But they're ultimately convinced to abandon the lords. So they have this, they can be reappropriated, whatever message they bring. But in most cultures, owls are associated with ruins, with death, with
Yes.
with desolation. Yeah.
They're fascinating creatures.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for bringing them up.
Thank you.
And Rebecca agrees that there are synchronicities with Craig Child's talk.
I think so. I will have to review it and make a list.
So I think now that we've reached an hour, that it may be time, Christine, for the thanks.
Is it possible for you to share my screen? I'm not sure. I've never done this. Can I do that?
So if you go down to the bottom of your screen, Christine, you should see a little green thing in the middle that says share screen. So
Okay.
let's see if that.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean that should be.
Oh, there it is. I think maybe I can do this. Okay. Can I do this?
Yes.
Is it there? Okay. Awesome.
Well, it doesn't look like anything yet, but there it is.
Oh wow! Oh, that's beautiful.
Okay, I'm glad that worked because I did not get a chance to practice this. Thank you so much, Ben, for sharing your thoughts, your thoughts with us, and it's going to be something for me to think about for a long time. But in thanks, we wanted to give you something that is actually a timeless gift.
That's gorgeous.
This mineral is amazonite from Pikes Peak. It's also known as the blue flash of the Rockies. It's a blue-green variety of potassium spelfar. It has been used for millennia to grace human burials, which tells you something about its timelessness. And I will also, this is on the way to you, I think, and I will also send you an article about it. So you can find out, you can learn more about this wonderful mineral. But thank you so much. We are so thrilled that you came to join us tonight.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure to talk with you. I wish it could be in person, and thank you for this. It's gorgeous. I can't wait to actually touch and hold it.
It will happen. It will happen provided the Postal Service continues. Thank you so much, Ben.
Kelly,
thank you.
can I just give Ben a little personal note? So many of us know Diane and Gordon. I just wanted you to know that I certainly do. So how are they related? How are they related to you?
Diane is my mother's sister.
Ah.
Yeah. She's Aunt Diane.
Well, they have a plenty big house. You should come on out.
I was planning on it. It was an easy draw to get me out there. And I haven't been out there it's been more than 20 years.
You're missing out, but you know that probably.
No, I hope to correct that as soon as the situation allows it.
Thank you.
Well, thanks again. It was a real pleasure for me as well.
Thank you, Ben, and thanks for everyone that joined us this evening. Join us again next month to hear from Jeff Lockwood about the locusts.
I think that's another bit of synchronicity there.
Yeah, I want to tune into that one.
I know you did, Ben. Please join in because I think that you will find it very interesting.
Please send me a link. Yeah.
I will do that.
We
I'll
will.
do it.
I will do
I'll-
that, Ben.
Yes, we'll do that.
All right, well, I'm going to end the meeting. Again, thank you, Ben, and just really appreciate you joining us. Have a good rest of your
That's
evening,
great.
and good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thanks again.